The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I guess the academic question is that balance that I talked about in my opening statement about austerity measures and how they impact recovery. Your view in general on that issue and how the European plan seems to strike that balance, or how effectively it might do that? Either, both of you, please.
Well, I think the answer to your question depends on which country you're talking about. I mean, there are countries like Greece, Ireland, and Portugal, which are currently under European Union, Eurozone, and IMF support, which have essentially no alternative but to do whatever they can to reduce their fiscal deficits, and they've been trying to do that, although the slowing in growth has made it more difficult. More broadly, there are some countries that have some fiscal space, as it's called, and there they might consider a balanced approach which leaves some flexibility in the short term to deal with the fact that Europe is slowing, their economy is slowing, at the same time addressing longer-term fiscal issues in a comprehensive long-term plan, which is, for example, they're trying to do through their fiscal compact. So that's analogous to an approach the United States might take, which is a comprehensive plan that has both a short-term and a long-term component to it.
I think the chairman said exactly right. You have to distinguish the countries that lost the ability to borrow on their own without support from those that still have that capacity. In general, for the countries still in the acute stage of crisis, you want a medium-term plan to gradually phase in the reductions in deficits that have to come. And you want that to be balanced by, complemented by reforms that are focused on trying to improve the growth performance of the economy, make it easier to start a business, things like that. Very important to get that balance right. And as I said, it takes a bunch of financial support to make sure those reforms have time to work. And you want to make sure they're phasing gradually over time. And you want to avoid the risk that, again, every time growth disappoints, and therefore the short-term effects on the deficit are to increase the deficit, you want to avoid the risk that has to be matched by immediate cuts in spending or tax cuts or tax increases, because if you do that, the risk is you add to the challenge on growth and it's harder to dig you out of this problem. So that's the balance I think you want to have.
And how did they do? I mean, how are they
doing?
Well, if you want to talk about the countries that are more acute, like Greece and Italy and others, how do they do striking this balance? How optimistic are you that? I mean, the concern is for those, if we are so dependent on their recovery, and perhaps we can learn some lessons there, did they go too far with these countries that are really hurting and stymie the opportunity for recovery?
I don't believe you can say that in Greece and Ireland and Portugal, because, again, once you get to that point, there's really no choice, no alternative available to them except to do this mix of very tough reforms across the board. And the other countries in Europe, they're in a different position. They have a bit more time and space to bring a bit more care and balance to the path. Of course, Greece and Ireland and Portugal are very small economies, even aggregate, in that context. What hurts the United States is the risk of a longer period of weak economic growth in the major economies in Europe. And that's why it's so important that as they've calmed the financial tensions across Europe, that they're able to shift some of the attention, some of the focus in Europe to broader strategies that would make growth stronger across the continent.
And in your overall assessment, their chances for recovery, why are they perhaps less optimistic, or you're less optimistic or more optimistic about where what Europe faces versus the U.S.?
Well, I think the fundamental reality of Europe is that this is going to take a very long time for them to work through. And I think just realistically, looking at the prospects ahead, even if Europe is able to be successful in avoiding a catastrophic financial crisis, and they have the means to do that, even if they're successful in avoiding that, then the risks are that Europe is still growing on average at very weak levels, and that'll mean that growth in the United States is weaker than it otherwise would be. And again, this process is a lot of risk in it, very fragile, a lot of political challenges this, as your colleagues have said, and that's why it's so important that they are doing everything they can, not just to restore some financial stability, but help lay a foundation for stronger growth. And it's why we have such a compelling economic interest in trying to work with them to help make that happen.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. A very good line of questioning. With that, we go to the chairman of the subcommittee.